Hello, everyone, and welcome to my review of Spectre. Now, as many of you may know, I'm a huge James Bond fan. I have reviewed every James Bond film, minus Never Say Never Again, which I haven't gotten around to yet, but that's an unofficial film anyway. But yeah, it's been 3 years since Skyfall. It's been a long wait for this film. And yeah, so here's my review. I seen it on opening night, and I seen it again tonight at the time of recording this. So I seen it twice, and I can confidently say I can actually make a review now and share my accurate thoughts and feelings about the film. So the first part of this review is going to be spoiler free. However, most of the review will be spoilers because there's not really much I can say without giving a lot of stuff away. Alright, so I'm just going to give a heads up when I go to the spoilers, but for now it's going to be safe. So, going into this film, I was expecting it to be better than Skyfall and actually better than like any previous Daniel Craig Bond film. So I had really high hopes for this film. And while I can't say my hopes were met, this is still a really enjoyable Bond film. However, there are some very glaring problems, and they're all mostly in the writing. But first of all, Daniel Craig gives a really good performance once again. I know a lot of people have been saying he looks really bored in this movie, but I never really saw it. The Bond girls also are really good, and they give good performances. I really wish Monica Bellucci was in the film a bit more. She's not in it for long, unfortunately. And the main villain, Christoph Waltz, he also does a pretty decent job. I'll talk more about him later. And all the MI6 regulars do really good too, and they're actually featured in this movie quite well, which I really, really like, especially Q. Q gets many, many more scenes in this compared to Skyfall, and he does a great job. He's definitely a scene stealer in every single scene. Also, Ralph Fiennes, he does a really, really good job also in this one. This film seems to be very like dialogue heavy, I find anyway. But I think that's more or less Sam Mendes' direction. He does mostly a pretty good job with this one. Not as good as he did with Skyfall, but still pretty decent. However, this film suffers the same problem that Skyfall did for me, and that is the action sequences. They just seem very average and middle of the road. They don't really go anywhere for me. They're not necessarily terrible, but they're not really amazing either, which is a shame because this series is known for great action sequences. And the last film that we got with great action sequences, in my opinion, was Casino Royale. If you want a great example, the parkour chase, one of the greatest action scenes in movie history, in my opinion. But yeah, the action sequences in this movie they're just so average. It really, really hurts because a lot of them have really great, interesting ideas. But I don't know. Like, Sam Mendes doesn't really seem like a great action director to me, and that's quite evident with this. The plot is actually pretty decent up until the end where it falters out. The writing just gets really bad at that point. But there's a big problem with well, actually, it's not the plot, it's the subplot with Andrew Scott's character, Max Denby. And basically what they did was that whole thing in Skyfall with, like, the spies aren't relevant anymore, that whole kind of thing in Skyfall. They reused that pretty much almost exactly for this one, except they change a few things. But it just feels really lazy, and any scene with Andrew Scott's character kind of just takes me out of the movie. I just didn't find it that interesting, and it felt so rehashed. I just didn't like it at all, and it kind of killed a lot of stuff for me. The score is also pretty average. Nothing really stuck out too much. The score was done by Thomas Newman, who also did the score for Skyfall, the previous Bond film. and both of them just seem very much the same. They almost seem the exact same. Personally, I'm a huge fan of John Barry and David Arnold, especially David Arnold. I really loved his scores. He did Tomorrow Never Dies to Quantum of Solace, so he did quite a few movies. And I just really liked his score. If they could get him back for the next one, that would be amazing. But yeah, I'm just not a huge fan of Thomas Newman's score. I mean, it just, once again, same thing as I said before. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just really average. And I hate using that word because no James Bond film should be average. So I have been saying some negative things about the movie, but here's the thing about this movie that makes it really enjoyable to me. This movie feels like a James Bond film. The last three, actually, I might as well say all the previous Daniel Craig Bond films didn't really feel like James Bond to me. Casino Royale was a phenomenal movie, and it showed Bond's beginnings. Quantum of Solace kind of did nothing at all, really, except just expand on Casino Royale, I guess. Skyfall was also a really well-shot movie and very enjoyable, although it didn't really feel like Bond at all. But this film actually feels like James Bond. They follow the formula a lot more, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And the best way to sum this up is compared to Skyfall. Skyfall is a really good movie, but an average James Bond movie. This is a really good James Bond movie, but an average movie on its own. And that's the best way to describe this. It's still really enjoyable. It's great to see James Bond back again, going strong after 53 years. Pretty amazing. I really enjoyed it. I'm definitely be getting it on Blu-ray. So the hardest part is giving this film a score out of 10. And currently, I'd probably give it probably a 7.5 out of 10. When I reviewed Skyfall close to release, I gave it a 9. Although that definitely changed. I would probably give Skyfall probably roughly the same score as this one. The hardest thing is choosing between this or Skyfall. They're both very different, and it's hard to pick one over the other. When I first seen this movie last week, I ranked it higher than Skyfall, but then when I got home, a few days later, I rewatched Skyfall, and I really enjoyed it more than I usually do. So I don't know. I still can't really decide which one is better. They're both good in their own ways. And one last thing to say, without giving anything away, I feel like this movie is a precursor to something that will be even greater. So looking forward to Bond 25. All right, so if you made it this far, that means you've already seen the film. If you haven't, do not continue to watch because I'm going to be giving away some massive spoilers. So just close out right now. All right, so I'm just going to go over a few things in the film that I want to go over. So it opens up with the gun barrel sequence for the first time since Die Another Day in 2002. I actually spoiled this for myself before going into the film. I kind of wish I didn't, but still I was so pumped for it, and it was great. It just felt so good to see that at the beginning for once. And Daniel Craig's gun barrel thing and pose and everything is all really, really good, especially compared to Quantum of Solace and Skyfall. The only complaint is that it didn't really fade out on the scene. Usually it kind of fades out and then fades back in on the scene. It didn't really do that. Faded out on that whole Dead or Alive thing, which I didn't really like. I thought that was really silly. But then we get the PTS, which takes place in Mexico City. The very first shot of the film is incredible. It's a really, really long shot. I think it's like a 5-minute shot or something. Maybe even more. And I know they edited it in spots, but they made it look like one shot. And it's absolutely incredible. The action in the PTS, it's not as exciting as Skyfall's. Skyfall had a really good pre-title sequence, but it's still pretty good. It's definitely in the higher end, I would say. Bond has to chase Marco Sciarra through the festival. And the fight on the helicopter is pretty cool too. There are some dodgy CGI effects there, but I can look past that. Then we get to the theme song done by Sam Smith, which is Writings on the Wall. When I first heard this, I didn't really like it, but then when I seen it in the film, I actually enjoyed it a lot more. And while I don't think it's as good as Skyfall, it's definitely not as bad as Another Way to Die. It's nowhere near as good as You Know My Name by Chris Cornell. That's probably one of my favorite James Bond theme songs. But, I mean, this is a pretty decent song. It works well with the film. I can definitely see how some people would find his voice really annoying, because I kind of did at first, but I don't know, it grew on me. It's alright. And the whole title sequence, too, with the octopus and everything, it looks really, really great. It's probably one of my favorite title sequences in the entire series. Monica Bellucci's character is pretty interesting. She plays a character who is the widow of the assassin Bond killed in the beginning. And it's just a shame that she only gets like 3 scenes, and then she like disappears for the rest of the film. I believe Bond gets Felix to rescue her or something, which is really cool. I like how they mentioned Felix Leiter. I was really hoping we get to see him again, because I really like Jeffrey Wright's performance. But unfortunately, he doesn't appear. But I just really wish we got to see more of Monica Bellucci in this film. It's a real shame. Shortly after, Bond goes to a meeting where the Spectre organization is. And there we get the introduction of the main villain of the film, Franz Oberhauser, played by Christoph Waltz, who is a phenomenal actor. He is one of my favorite actors pretty much of all time. He's only been in like mainstream movies recently. I first saw him in Inglourious Bastards, where he did a phenomenal job. That was definitely his best performance, in my opinion. And his introduction in this film is absolutely incredible. One of the best scenes of the movie is that Spectre meeting. Silva had a really good introduction in Skyfall, but this definitely beats it. I just really, really love it. It's like he has like a really silent and epic build-up. It's so good. Dave Bautista's character is also introduced in this scene. He plays a henchman by the name of Mr. Hanks, and he has a few scenes in this film, and he does a terrific job in every single one of them. He plays kind of like a classic Bond henchman in the same vein as Jaws and Oddjob, like kind of like an indestructible silent type. And he fits the role perfectly. He's definitely one of my favorite aspects of this film. I just kind of wish he came back near the end, but we'll talk more about that in a few moments. But there's a car scene here, a car chase between Bond and him. And it's funny because Bond has like a gadget-laden car, and he hits a few switches, and like most of them don't do anything. It's really funny. It's more of a comedy scene, kind of like something out of the Roger Moore era. But it's a pretty entertaining scene. And Bond, of course, escapes. And then he goes to Austria to find Mr. White, who also appears in this movie, returning from Quantum of Solace and Casino Royale. He was one of my favorite characters in those films, and it's absolutely terrific to see him again. The scene with him and Bond at the table inside that cottage, one of the best scenes of the film. This film just has so many great, memorable scenes. It's just so good. And of course, Mr. White kills himself, unfortunately, which I actually didn't see coming. It was kind of a shock. I really wish we got to see more of him in the film, but, you know, it makes sense, I guess. I actually really like how they give him more of a human feel. Like, he was portrayed as pretty evil in Casino Royale and Quantum, but here he's portrayed more as a human being. And he reveals his love for his daughter, who is hiding from Spectre. And Bond promises that he'll go and, you know, keep her safe. So then Bond goes to find her. We get an action scene where Mr. Hanks kidnaps her, and Bond has to go chase It's pretty entertaining, but like I said in the non-spoiler part, the action scenes just feel really average, and maybe the directing is to blame because it definitely feels like all the action scenes feel like they have much more potential. But it's entertaining. I find it funny how Mr. Hinks just shoots at Bond's plane and like blows like these giant holes in it. It's really funny. He's using like a little small revolver. So Bond, of course, rescues. I should mention her name, Madeline Swan, who is portrayed by Leah Seydoux. She plays a really good Bond girl. She's a great actress. I believe she was also in *Inglourious Bastards* of Christoph Waltz. She's definitely a good Bond girl. Probably not in my favorites, but she does a pretty good job. So a little bit later, Bond and Madeline go on a train, and Bond has one more final confrontation with Mr. Hinks in a really, really brutal train fight, very reminiscent of Bond's fight with Grant in From Russia with Love, which is considered to be one of the greatest fight scenes in the entire franchise. This sequence is very well choreographed, and it's definitely my favorite action scene in the whole film. It's just a really, really good fight. Bond eventually gets the upper hand on Mr. Hinks, and Mr. Hinks goes flying out the train attached to these barrels. And he only says one word in the entire film. He says "shit" as he gets hauled out, which is pretty funny. I thought he'd show up at least one more time because you don't actually see him die. Maybe they'll bring him back in a future film. I think that would be cool to see. I really liked his character. So then Bond and Madeline get to Franz Oberhauser's secret lair, which is very reminiscent of when Bond and Honey Rider get taken to see Dr. No in the very first James Bond film, Dr. No. Very, very, very reminiscent of that. Really liked every scene in this evil Spectre lair of sorts. So a lot of interesting continuity stuff happens at this point, where Oberhauser reveals to Bond that Le Chiffre, Dominic Green, and Silva all worked for him. And he also reveals that he was, directly responsible for the deaths of Vesper Lind and M. So they kind of do a little retcon here because, when Quantum of Solace came out, the organization was just Quantum. So they kind of made it seem like Quantum was like a subdivision of Spectre, which is okay. I can live with that. But I don't know. I don't think like Silva working for Spectre doesn't really make as much sense, I think. But, I can look past that, I guess. I can look past that. So then Bond gets tortured by this weird machine by Oberhauser. And then you see a shot of a white cat, and when I saw this, I was like, holy shit. Are they going to do what I think they're going to do? And sure enough, they do. Oberhauser reveals that he changed his name to Ernst Stavro Blofeld, who is basically Bond's arch nemesis from some of the older films. This character was in From Russia with Love, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Diamonds Are Forever, and a brief cameo in For Your Eyes Only. And I think Christoph Waltz does a really good job as Blofeld. I really like his portrayal. However, there's definitely a lot of untapped potential here. He probably had to work with the script that he was given. But I find like he could have done a lot more if he was given a better script to work with. But I'll talk more about him later when we get to the end. So it's around here where I have kind of a major complaint, and that is Blofeld's motive, which is basically that whole jealous kind of thing where his father was looking after Bond, and he didn't like that, so he killed his father. That whole thing, that's kind of silly to me. I didn't really like that. They should have just cut that out completely. Yeah, I'm not a fan of that. Kind of bothered me a little bit. But Bond escapes in kind of a cool fashion with an exploding watch. Kind of reminded me of GoldenEye with the exploding pen a little bit. But I really like that, how he escaped. And from this point on, the film kind of nosedives, and it just doesn't really become that enjoyable anymore. Now, around this point, I believe it's around the 1 hour 50-minute mark or something, or 1 hour 45, something like that. So that's a large portion of the movie that I find enjoyable. However, the final act, I don't know, I thought it was really weak. So Bond and Madeline, they go meet M, Tanner, Q, and Moneypenny and whatever. They go to stop C from launching the Nine Eyes program or whatever. And Bond gets kidnapped and taken to some weird building where, like, you see faces of M and Lashif and all these other characters from the past up on the walls. I found that really silly. And then Bond, of course, comes face to face with Blofeld, who escaped, and he has the scar and everything, which I actually did like. I like that. They kept his hair, which is cool. I'm glad they didn't do the whole Dr. Evil look, but the scar was really cool. And then Bond is given 3 minutes to find Madeline and escape, which I found kind of dumb. I don't know. I didn't really like that. Meanwhile, M goes to stop C, and they have like a 5-second fight or something, and then C falls out the window and dies. Silly stuff. But Bond rescues Swan. They get in a boat, and Bond literally shoots down Blofeld's helicopter with like 6 shots or something with his PPK. I think it's PPK. And Bond goes to find Blofeld. Blofeld's crawling out of the helicopter, and he doesn't kill him. He throws the gun away, and Blofeld is arrested, which is really interesting because I really hope they bring him back in a future film and do more with his character. I just hope they don't recast Blofeld, because I think Christoph Waltz is a really great actor, and given another opportunity, he can kind of improve the role a lot more. I thought he did a really good job as is, but definitely could have did more. But that's pretty much the movie. Then they make it seem like Bond is retiring or something, and he goes off with Madeline. He gets the old DB5, and he takes off, and then the movie ends. I didn't really like the ending either. I didn't really like any of the final act. That's where I think this film kind of fell a bit. Like I was saying before, with the writing, they definitely could have improved this a lot with a rewrite or two. Well, that's it for Spectre. I really enjoyed it. Kind of let down by the final act, but most of the movie I find really enjoyable. It definitely feels more like a classic Bond film, which is a nice, refreshing change after the previous few films. Although I don't think this reaches the heights of Casino Royale, which was a really, really well-made film. I definitely think this is on level of Skyfall, if not better. I've only seen this twice. I've seen Skyfall maybe 4 or 5 times. But I'll have to give this a few more watches when it comes out on Blu-ray and see if my opinion changes then. But for now, it's a pretty good Bond film. I'm really pleased with this. So thanks everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave your opinions of the film down in the comments below. No spoilers, though. And yeah, tell me what you think. Thanks for watching.